Fogle's actions resulted in the sexual victimization of 12 minors in the state of Indiana.
Former Subway spokesman Gerald Fogle admits to having sex with minors and trading images of child pornography. Good evening, everyone. I'm John Stair.
I'm Anne-Marie Tiernan. It's now 6 o'clock. It was today the prosecutors revealed the shocking details of their case. In it, they revealed numerous occasions of Fogle having sex with girls as young as 14 years old and having pornographic images of children who are much younger than that.
Now, as part of a plea deal, Fogle is pleading guilty to 1 count of travel to engage in sexual conduct with a minor and 1 count of distribution and receipt of child porn. He will face 5 to 12.5 years in prison, and he will pay $100,000 to each of 14 victims.
Tonight we have live team coverage for you, and we start with our crime beat reporter Steve Jefferson. He first broke the story of that investigation just last month. Steve?
Anne-Marie, when Jerry got off the elevator here at the federal courthouse, he and his attorneys went into a conference room for about 45 minutes until the hearing started. Jared showed no emotions despite the serious charges he's facing.
Jared Fogle expects to go to prison. He will do his time.
Jared Fogle's lead defense attorney acknowledged prison is in the future of the former Subway spokesperson. He also talked about his client getting help for his sexual addiction involving children.
Jared also knows that he has a medical problem. He has already sought evaluation by a world-class psychiatrist experienced in these matters, and he will seek appropriate treatment.
Surrounded by U.S. Marshals, Jared pushed through a mob of cameras to a waiting car outside the federal courthouse. On July 7th, cyber cops surprised Jared and his family with an early morning raid at their Zionsville home. Eyewitness News broke the story as task force officers carried out Jared's electronics. They reportedly found images and video of underage children they say Jared knew about as part of a child porn ring. The raid came after officers arrested his former foundation executive director, Russell Taylor, on child porn charges. At the federal courthouse, this courtroom sketch of Jared shows his demeanor as unmoved by the charges and prison time he faces. As part of a pending guilty plea bargain, his attorney shared the 37-year-old admits he was wrong.
He has already volunteered to make restitution to those individuals who have been impacted by his behavior. He knows that restitution can't undo the damage that he's done, but he will do all in his power to try to make it right.
As part of the formalities, the judge entered a not guilty plea on Jared's behalf today. He's scheduled to come back here to the courthouse and go before Judge Pratt to change that not guilty plea to a guilty plea as part of the bargain with prosecutors. At that time, he'll get a sentencing date and learn exactly how much time he will spend in prison. Reporting live, Steve Jefferson, Channel 13, Eyewitness News.
Thank you, Steve. Fogle's wife, Kathleen, who goes by Katie, filed for divorce today and released this statement. Quote, obviously, I am extremely shocked and disappointed by the recent developments involving Jared. My focus is exclusively on the well-being of my children. Also, Fogle's family released a separate statement today saying they are, quote, shocked and profoundly disappointed in Jared's abhorrent criminal behavior. At the same time, we are gratified that Jared is accepting responsibility for what he has done. And Subway tweeting this statement today, Jared Fogle's actions are inexcusable and do not represent our brand's values. We had already ended our relationship with Jared.
Federal prosecutors say they had a mountain of evidence against Jared Fogle. Investigators analyzed thousands of images, text messages, and emails to determine that there were 14 underage victims. Eyewitness News reporter Jeremy Bryan has a look at what the former Subway spokesman now admits to doing over a period of years.
Jared Fogle's crimes against children began in 2011, but initially it was more passive. He was receiving and looking at nude images of children. All of that changed, though, in 2012 when he traveled and paid for sex with an underage prostitute. Prosecutors say this man, Russell Taylor, the former director of the nonprofit Jared Foundation, produced nude pictures and videos of children as young as 6 years old from inside his Indianapolis home using hidden cameras. Those images were shared with Fogle, who failed to report any of it to police. Then, during 2 business trips to New York City, Fogle paid for sex with a 17-year-old prostitute and with an even younger girl. Not all of the victims knew who Jared Fogle was. Some only found out at a later time.
I cannot think of anything more repugnant than sexually victimizing a child. Any and all resources have been, will be, and will always be committed to seeking out who you are and where you live, no matter who you are.
It made it all the worse that that's happening with a famous person, because it draws attention to what they've had to go through. This is one of the reasons why they need such high restitution and why we really made it a priority to get him help.
And the amount of that restitution is $1.4 million, $100,000 for each of the young victims, the largest for a case like this in Indiana, and prosecutors say perhaps the largest settlement amount of restitution in the nation. But they say it is appropriate that 4 of the victims are now adults and they need that money to rebuild their lives. From downtown, Jeremy Brilliant, Channel 13 Eyewitness News.
Thank you, Jeremy. In addition to that restitution, Fogle will be sentenced between 5 and 12 years in prison, followed by 5 years probation. He also is required to register as a sex offender. So is justice here being served, or did Jared Fogle get a sweetheart deal because he's a celebrity? 13 Investigates senior reporter Bob Siegel is here to examine whether or not the punishment fits the crime. Bob?
Anne-Marie, when a celebrity falls from grace, especially as hard and as fast as Jared Fogle has, there's often a debate surrounding the punishment. This case does seem to be different because of the defendant's status, but a legal expert says that actually was not a good thing for Jared Fogle. Facing a very detailed and ugly list of allegations, Jared Fogle could have faced 50 years in prison for the serious charges against him. And yet, it appears he'll receive only a fraction of that time behind bars. Is Fogle getting special treatment? Federal officials insist that is not the case.
We believe that he should be treated no better and no worse than anybody else based on his status.
And this prominent criminal defense attorney agrees.
5 to 12 years in a federal prison for a sex offense is not a slap on the wrist.
Jack Crawford says based on the charges against Fogle, the plea agreement announced today is exactly what he'd expect.
No one gets 50 years for these kinds of offenses. I've done cases similar to this, not with celebrities, and I've had similar plea agreements. 5 to 12 and a half years is generally in the ballpark for these kinds of crimes.
The punishment may not be unusual, but legal experts say the investigation into Fogle, both in its scope and its speed, was extraordinary.
The weight of the investigation that was applied to Jared is different.
159,634 text messages, 27,140 emails, 47,623 images, and 3,394 videos.
I think in a way his celebrity status may have hurt him a little bit because authorities threw everything but the kitchen sink into this case.
Now that the investigation is over and the plea has been announced, the U.S. Attorney's Office made a point of saying it doesn't matter who you are, famous or not, if you exploit children and get caught, you will face a harsh penalty. Also worth noting, while we're expecting a 5 to 12-year sentence, it's possible the federal judge could scrap that recommendation and sentence Jared Fogle to even more time in prison. Back to you.
All right, thank you, Bob. Well, today's been a quiet day in the Fogle house in the neighborhood in Zionsville. No apparent activity there. The newspaper and packages from yesterday still on the front steps. Most of his neighbors that we approached had no comment, but a few did express disappointment. When we asked about the $1.4 million in compensation that was going to his victims, this is what we heard.
Is that enough?
No. No, it's not enough. You know, those people will probably never get their lives back. Not totally. It's kind of scary that it's in this neighborhood, but you know, it happens all over, and I'm glad they caught him.
He was also concerned about Fogle's 2 children who now will be living without their father. We have the full background of this case, from the investigation to the evidence and the plea deal that will put Jared Fogle in prison for 5 to 12 and a half years. You can find all of it on our homepage at WTHR.com.